Hi, I'm going to be responding to Jessica's main claim that reducing red meat consumption would significantly lessen current accelerated climate change. Her secondary claims are, number one, the raising of red meat releases copious amounts of methane, a greenhouse gas, into the atmosphere. Number two, cattle raising causes deforestation. And number three, greenhouse gases cause climate change. I wanted to point out that in her main claim she says red meat consumption, and then the rest of her argument she only talks about cattle, and cattle is not the only red meat. She says nothing about pork, which is actually a red meat. But onto my response to her first claim of the raising of red meat releases copious amounts of methane, a greenhouse gas, into the atmosphere. She stated that cattle manure accounts for 50% of the manure methane from all livestock. And that only comes from livestock, which actually livestock only represents 14.5% of all anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, which means anything from man or man-made kind of sort of thing. So yeah, cows produce 50%, but it's just a small percentage of the 14.5 of all greenhouse gas emissions for methane. She also talks about how methane is only contributes to 10% of greenhouse gases, and I found out that agriculture only makes up 40% of that 10%, and agriculture is not like exclusive to cattle raising. It talks about farming of crops and other animals. For example, there's a study done with flooded rice paddies, and made as much as 500 million tons, which is around 20% of the man-made emissions of this gas. Her second claim is cattle raising causes deforestation. She says 26% of the planet's ice-free land is used for livestock grazing. That's a very small percentage of land that's used for grazing. And she also says livestock, which actually is more than just red meat. Livestock actually includes horses, sheep, goats, even alpacas. She also says that the biggest driver of deforestation is agriculture, and WWF, which is World Wildlife Fund, said that although agriculture is a driver of deforestation, it is not the biggest. The biggest driver is international timber trade, especially illegal logging. It is after the forest is cleared for these that they sell the land to agriculture businesses. She also says by 2050, consumption of meat and dairy is expected to have risen 76%. I found out from a government website that people are eating more meat, but they're eating more chicken, which is not a red meat. And chicken produces less methane gas and CO2. Her third claim is that greenhouse gases causes climate change, which, I mean, I don't think anyone can say that's not true. But she connects this all to agriculture being a huge contributor to greenhouse gases, thus accelerating climate change. But I found out from the EPA that in the US, only 9% of greenhouse gases are emitted from agriculture uses, and with electricity being the highest at 29%, followed closely by transportation with 27%. And also the EPA said in the world only 24% of greenhouse gases are emitted from agriculture. So in conclusion, reducing red meat consumption would lessen climate change, but it would not do it significantly. So
All right, Erica, you need to be a little bit more assertive in making your arguments. Sometimes you sound like you are uncertain about what position you're taking. Not exactly timid, but it comes across as maybe this, maybe that. I think you've got some good information here that responds to some of these points very directly, and you need to make your declarative sentences sound like declarations rather than questions or explanations or even just minor reservations. I also think that you need to cite your sources more consistently. You did a couple of times cite the sources, like on the EPA on that last section. You cited that pretty clearly. There was a citation from the World Wildlife Federation, but there were several other places where we got statistical information. I know you got it from someplace. I just don't know where you got it from, and that needs to be in the presentation. So you need to be more consistent about citing those particular points. On the methane issue, on the first point, you kind of diminish the significance of it. You say it's 14% of all of these gases come from this. That's okay. I think that kind of puts it in perspective. The notion that it's a big driver of anthropogenic global warming, I think, is a little bit problematic. This one piece of information about rice paddies, I thought that was a point that could potentially represent a good counterclaim that suggests that other kinds of agriculture, particularly non-meat production, can also produce these sorts of things, and that would be a good illustration. That's another one where I'm not exactly sure what the source is. You referred to a study there, but I don't get a source citation on the study, so that's kind of an illustration. Just as a couple of indicators, sometimes the points that you're making about it not being red meat matter, sometimes it doesn't matter. So, for example, later on when you're suggesting that meat consumption's going up, but most of that is chicken, that's, I think, a good point that diminishes the advocate's argument. The pork is red meat also. I don't know that that gets you much. And by the way, I know that they've always advertised as it being the other white meat. So I'm not exactly sure what that gets you in the long run. It's a press that's at best confuses the issue, and I'm not sure that that's really what you want to do. I think the better arguments are the percentages that you have. Look, agriculture accounts for a small percentage of this, and livestock contributes a small percentage of the agriculture, and that the red meat consumption represents an even smaller portion of the livestock issue. That's the way I think you want to summarize that argument. So you're not going to deny that it has an impact, but how significant the impact is. Look, we've got all these other things that are contributing to greenhouse gases. Agriculture is a small percentage of that, and in the United States, the red meat part of that is really small. In other places that it might be a little bit larger, that's a possibility, but the advocate doesn't really break it down that way. I did like the counterclaim on the deforestation issue that suggests that it's really primarily driven by timber, and that the agricultural uses come after the timber issue has come about. It's not because of the agricultural uses that they're cutting those things down. That, I thought, was the clearest and strongest argument that you had in the argument. Okay, we're going to stop there. You guys have a good evening. Thank you.